It lit up the trail enough to see where I placed my feet.
Roger.
I was halfway through the trail when I came across a little bridge that led deeper into the forest, a spot I had crossed hundreds of times before during daytime walks with no trouble at all. One of my songs faded out slowly at that moment, and before the next track could start playing through my earphones, I heard the most blood-curdling scream that I had ever heard in my entire life echo sharply from the trees ahead. I took my headphones off quickly, thinking maybe a boar or another forest critter had stepped into a trap, since that kind of thing happens from time to time around here, with all the hunters in the area. Then I took a step closer, moving half over the bridge to get a better look into the shadows beyond, and I heard it again. This time closer, even more piercing through the air. I turned on my torch. My hands were shaking slightly from the shock, and shone the beam around the trees. And that is when I saw it clear as day in the light. A snow-white, skinny face with pitch-dark eyes, looking straight at me from between dark trunks nearby. I had never felt this horrified in my entire life up until that point. As my insides told me, if I took another step forward across the bridge, something terrible would happen to me right then and there. I did not care what might come after me or block my way. I turned around immediately without another thought and ran the other way home, straight through the moonlit path. Next, I felt a considerable feeling of dread press in the back of my neck the whole time during that run. That was when I burst through my front doors finally, slammed it shut, and locked it tight behind me, then leaned against the wall inside to catch my breath after the panic. So I stood there shaking for a minute, heart racing wild in my chest, trying to make sense of the face and scream that replayed over in my mind. I checked all the windows and doors twice that night, making sure nothing followed me back from the forest's edge. But ever since that night, whenever I stayed home alone, I'd feel watched and uneasy in broad daylight. I'd also hear footsteps on the porch, and my garden furniture was moved around on several occasions. I have no clue what that white face with dark eyes could have been, or why it seemed to stalk me with those ongoing signs around my place. So if anyone knows what lurked there in the German forest or how to make it stop, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Silly maneuver. Why is this the smarter way? You can save up to 80%.
Waiting on you, Commander.
And you'll know exactly what's reaching your recipient. Be smart. Get wise.
I was driving home from work late one night. It must have been around 10:30 p.m. Overcast with a little fog sometime in late fall. My route took me off the highway through a farming area with big trees on the left and fields on the right. The road was really straight, and my headlights reached far ahead. I was scanning for deer, which I often saw on this road. A ways ahead of me, I saw movement in the tree line, so I started to slow down. Instead of deer, a person slipped out the tree line. They didn't have a flashlight or cell phone light. They sauntered onto the road, and I slowed down even more.
Waiting for orders.
I couldn't see any clear features, but it was clearly a person with long legs and thin arms. I could see the bend of their knees, the swing of their arms. They were still pretty far ahead, about a halfway mark across the road. They swiveled their head to look in my direction, and in one fluid motion fell to all fours, and they took off in a loping, bounding run to the field. I was able to see them for a few seconds more, and it was fast. My dad's a hunter, so I asked him what he thought. He said it was probably a bear, and showed me some videos, but it didn't look anything like the bear. It was too thin, too lanky, and I could clearly see the bends in its knees and elbows. It walked with the fluid confidence of a person, yet bounded away like a beast. It's been years now, and every once in a while I'll think about it and watch more videos of bears walking, and it still doesn't match. And I can't convince myself that's what it was. And yes, I've stopped taking that route home. I spent the extra 5 minutes to go the long way. I was about 14 years old in 2003 when I saw something in the woods that I had never been able to explain, no matter how much I turned it over in my head. So let me take you back. I grew up in western North Carolina among the Appalachian foothills, surrounded by thick woods, populated with deer, black bears, and coyotes. So those areas held nothing exotic like primates running around free. Just the usual wildlife I knew from years spent near my house. That was when one afternoon I walked through a patch of woods not far from home. It was a spot I had been back to plenty of times without thinking twice about it. It was not deep wilderness at all, just one of those semi-rural wooded areas tucked behind someone's house along the edge of town. And that's when I got that gut feeling that I was being watched, cutting through me. I scanned the trees slowly, eyes moving branch to branch under the afternoon light filtering down. And that was when I saw it crouched on a thick branch, maybe 20 to 25 feet up, clear against the leaves and bark. The best way to describe it would be an orangutan lemur hybrid, with long arms, a compact body, and a sort of hunched posture. The limbs looked too long for its torso hanging there steady, the fur appearing dark, maybe reddish-brown or greyish through the cover. It's hard to pin down exactly in the dappled shade, so it was not shaped like a bear cub at all that I recognized from past sightings, and definitely not a raccoon scrambling around clumsily. That was when I focused on the face, clearest of all, not like a raccoon's muzzle or snout, like a fox prowling nearby, but more primate-like, with forward-facing eyes, staring down. It sat there watching me without moving a muscle, locked in place as our eyes met. That was when it moved without warning.
I hear ya.
I do not mean it climbed down slowly towards me. It launched sideways through the trees fast, arm over arm swinging, but more controlled and efficient than any monkey I'd ever seen at a zoo or on TV. Within a few seconds, it disappearing completely from view without a trace left behind. There were no crashing branches shaking down like a bear would cause, and I stood there trying to convince myself I misidentified something ordinary in the adrenaline rush. That's when I thought of a juvenile bear, perhaps blending into the leaves. But I had seen both plenty of times around the foothills and knew that this was not the case. So for the next few years, I kept half expecting an article about someone's escaped exotic pet turning up, since North Carolina folk keep weird animals sometimes, even out in rural spots. I never found anything like reports or chatter about it anywhere after searching for it, and I quietly shelved it in my brain as that weird thing I once saw. Until a few years down the line, I was listening to an episode of the podcast Lore during a drive, hearing them mention pugwidges from Algonquin folklore out of nowhere. The description talked about small upright beings living in wooded areas watching people from trees, throwing rocks sometimes and disappearing quickly when spotted. I actually paused the episode right there because chills hit me hard from how close it matched. Still, I didn't want to straight, as that was blissful back then, not claiming folklore proved real or anything like that. But the watching from the trees part struck me immediately, uncomfortably close to what locked eyes with me that afternoon. Fast forward to a few months ago, when for reasons I cannot really justify even now, I went back to that same patch of wood after I was bored by then. Figured I would probably feel silly for getting creeped out by shadows in those trees as a kid.
Another hit like that.
I was maybe 10 minutes walking familiar ground when something something smacked me hard in the shoulder out of nowhere. That was when I realized it was not a branch falling loose above, but a small rock thrown with real force that stung and hit my shirt. I looked up immediately, scanning the branches, and about 30 feet away, partially behind a tree, I saw a small outline standing there, short, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall if I guessed, thin frame, half hidden, but enough to know it was not a deer or person messing around. That's when it moved. Just like years earlier, the second it seemed to register I was looking straight at it, it darted off, lowering the concrete trees in seconds. I did not chase after it into the brush or call out wandering, and I didn't stick around even a minute longer than I needed to, and was gone. I left that patch of woods straight away, heading back to familiar ground without looking over my shoulder once. A past co-worker and friend of mine called Ralph was on vacation visiting family on the island of Puerto Rico. One day while walking down a sidewalk bordering a busy 2-lane highway,
Get you back to the bone, they do get out of bus. Panties on the floor, hair tie with no makeup. Every time you where you wanna go.
highway, something very odd occurred.
Roger
The
that.
layout is important, so picture this. A highway running straight through a small valley, with large hills rising steeply on each side, like a river, cutting through a low mountain range. People were walking up and down the hillside, going about their day. As Ralph strolled along the sidewalk, he began to notice cars slowing down, then stopping entirely. Pedestrians slowed down too.
Did the United States...
First is, can I open this?
Yeah.
So we start down.
Roger that. Digging in.
No voy a creer que
Sound smart. Cooling.
That was done by Iran.
Good work, Commander. Hold this position until the package is underway.
Hunkering down.
Confirmed. Holding.
Good job. Objective secured.
Oh. You hear me? Okay, well, I'm not.
Moving to position.
On my way.
Aye, aye.
Position confirmed. Coordinates received.
Mech warriors, show them what you got. What's up, boss? Lifting off. Roger.
What can I do for you? Moving out. This is good. Want some more, huh? What's up, boss? On it.
Give them everything you've got.
The underground station, abandoned, evacuated, stripped of everything valuable. The tomb. Temporary work lights cast jagged shadow.
Afterwards, we said if
A question asked occasionally in response to faction focus videos on this channel is, okay, that's all well and good, but how do I
Yes,
go about
Commander.
actually collecting this army? Which is, to be fair, a very valid
Engaging
question to
jump
ask after I've just spent time talking about what the faction does. The answer will vary from faction to faction, but in this video, we're looking to start
Now let's see
answering
how you handle
the Morat aggression use. Now, firstly, this video request in particular comes from channel supporter Damien C.
That's a kill.
And in the spirit of that request, here is roughly how we're going to tackle this.
Waiting for
We'll
orders.
be looking at how you buy into the beginning of a Morat
read you,
Aggression
Commander.
Force collection,
Moving
with a focus on specific boxes that you can purchase, what you get in those boxes, what is good about those profiles, why you might want them, and then also what are some possible conversion or proxy opportunities. And that's something that in particular, because different factions will absolutely have different challenges with regards to playing truly what you see as what you get. In
this video, I'm going to try and hew to what you see is what you get. That is to say, weapon options, troop profiles, etc. as much as possible. But by necessity, I am going to call out where I think a profile we can't otherwise access is highly desirable, and how we might get there. Where a model that we've purchased as part of, say, an action pack might be a good basis for a proxy or a conversion. The focus here is how I would start collecting the faction, and so there is going to be a little bit of a focus on competitive or semi-competitive lists and profiles that I like, and getting access to them at as reasonable a cost as possible. And those things are, particularly in Morad's, ultimately going to be a little bit in tension with playing true what you see is what you get. So I really do want to emphasize here that Infinity is a game with a relatively permissive proxy culture. We wanted to have, in the end, an army that looks good and is visually consistent and is easy to understand from the silhouette of models and the weapon armaments and etc. what is going on, but maybe isn't 100% true. What you see is what you get, and that also means that if there is a model that I haven't mentioned as part of the way that we're going to approach this, don't let that stop you from buying it if you think the model is one you would like to argue for its merits. That's the other upside of having a proxy culture in Infinity lists. If you think, for example, the Ragnarok Sergeant Major is an awesome model and it's very nice, well, it comes in the starter pack, so find a way to use it, even if the Ragnarok as a profile is going to be pretty rare to use. Finally, we're going to go through different lists that you can play at different stages of the collection, using only the models that are in the boxes that we're buying, again with a nod toward perhaps some boxes or conversions where I think it's necessary. In some factions in future, that might require quite a lot of work. In other factions, perhaps more recent releases, Morats are relatively new. But in some factions, there might be such a short fleet of models that it's actually really quite easy. And so with that, again, with the guiding star being, how would I personally, if I was spending my money, jump into a this faction? Let's take a look at how it would go being Morat Aggression Force. And so for a couple of reasons, we're going to start with Morat Aggression Force's action pack. Now, there are a couple of reasons why we're going to do this. The first is the channel supporter Damien has already purchased this box, and so if I said don't buy it, that would kind of be a grim start to the video, but they tend to be good value. There's a bunch of models in here, and even if we will definitely stop using some of them over time, plenty of them will remain their mainstays. There's a nice variance, and it is a good place to start. So what we get are 3 Vanguard Line Infantry, 1 Kaitok Heavy Infantry, 1 Zerat Skirmisher, 1 Raktarak Medium Infantry, a Rassiat Drop Troop, a Dartok Hacker, and a Karsot Killing Platoon. There are a lot of models in here that perhaps you might not see in a competition list, which was actually Genesis for Damien's request for this video, but there are also some that are really solid, and there are plenty that will see occasional play or which just make boxes for things. So in terms of the stuff that you will see in competition lists, the Kaitok, the Rassiat, and the Dartok are all competition viable. Very solid. The Kaitok is an excellent, cheap, like linebacker heavy infantry. The Rassiat, particularly the Spitfire profile that you get in this box, is one of the scariest drop troops in the entire game. And the Dartok is just a very sound all-rounder hacker that we're making a lot of use of in Morat Aggression Force just for info war purposes. Now, things that can still be used even in competition lists, but which are a little bit more niche. The Zerat is a skirmisher model that you need to be fairly specific with your use case around. Specifically, and we'll talk about this in the Morat Aggression Force faction focus if you haven't already watched that, the Zerat is a skirmisher who can't begin the game in a marker state. Now, she does have the excellent mimetism -6, so she's hard to actually physically shoot, but most skirmishers by their nature have to deploy close to the enemy. That's what infiltration is, that's how you get benefit from it, and so being in a marker state helps insulate you from the risks of deploying really close to the enemy. When you deploy a Zerat really close to the enemy, she can be attacked because she isn't protected by a marker state, so she requires a bit more finesse and care and conservatism to use. It helps. And it has very interesting models that make it a short-range gunfighter, but it's a short-range gunfighter, and fundamentally will often need other things in the list before we can start adding it in. That makes the Karsot very cool, but it looks release, made kind of also by the fact that it doesn't count as a Morat in Morat Aggression Force fire teams, so it needs to be accompanied by at least 2 other models to get fire team bonuses. But if you put the work into a list to give it all the support that it needs, perhaps a spoon to let it close, perhaps a fire some suppressive range pieces, plenty of orders to get it into short range, particular things like the MSV2, the Spitfire submachine gun profile is actually one of the deadliest submachine guns in the game, and I've received a lot of reports from people who have used this model and they really like it. Now, obviously that means that the profiles that I haven't listed aren't quite so useful.